Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning or good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. And welcome to the 2025 Canadian Women in Cybersecurity Conference hosted by CyberX. It is an absolute pleasure and an honor to be here and to be speaking on a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Je suis tellement excitée. Je suis ravie de vous présenter cette présentation aujourd'hui. Mais malheureusement, ça fait un long temps que j'ai parlé en français. Ça fait un long temps que j'ai présenté en français. Donc aujourd'hui, cette présentation sera toute en anglais. Today's presentation will be all in English. I'm sure some of you are wondering, why sports privacy? Well, why not sports privacy? We're seeing the rise of women's sports. Many playoff series are happening right now. This evening, we have a bunch of games. Today's presentation is titled Exploring the Dynamic Nexus of User Experience and Data Privacy, a case study in sports. I'm going to take you on a journey for 30 minutes. We will cover a lot of material. I will try to simplify as much as possible throughout the entire presentation. Are you ready? I'm sure some of you are probably wondering, why on earth is Jessica here speaking about sports privacy? What qualifies her to speak on sports privacy? Well, folks, that's a great question, a very valid one. For many of you, you probably don't know, but I was once an athlete myself. I played basketball, I played dodgeball, I played volleyball from the ages 5 to 25, gymnastics, football, you name it, I was there. In addition to that, I was also a basketball statistician at 3 universities across Quebec and Ontario for approximately 5 years. For those of you who may not know this about me, I also have affiliations with 4 academic institutions where I speak on data privacy. But that's where I speak about my different love, my love for healthcare and digital health, and the intersection of digital health and data privacy. For those of you who are wondering, my current role, I'm a privacy advisor. Essentially, I advise my business, AstraZeneca Canada, on how to go about thinking about privacy in all their projects. I would like to share that the views expressed today during my presentation don't necessarily reflect the views of my organization. Again, I'm going to ask you, are you ready? Now, some people from some of my group chats may be laughing today that I'm wearing a Minnesota Timberwolves jersey. It is quite funny because I actually am a very huge Boston Celtics fan. And, you know, I've loved the Celtics. But anybody who knows what's happening in the basketball world right now knows that my team is down 3-1 in their playoff series. So what better time for me to audition and join another fan group, as it looks like my team is likely going to get eliminated soon. When we think about user experience in the sports space, I want you to think about how sports organizations try to engage their fans, how they enhance the fan experience. I want you to think about mobile applications, social media, and the experience that fans have inside a venue. I'll give you an example. Multiple reports show that the National Basketball Association, or the NBA, has seen a huge decline in the amount of viewership and fan engagement. So there's a reason this topic is quite relevant today. I'll talk about a personal example of mine from 2024, just last year. As a Boston Celtics fan who was so proud to win a championship in 2024, I traveled from Toronto all the way to Boston. There was so much excitement. There was so much anticipation. There were games and trivia, so many things available for fans. And the alerts on my phone, I've never seen so many alerts from the Celtics in my life, and they're still coming in. That's what we mean about user experience. That's what we mean about user experience in sports. Now, I'm going to shift gears. Now I'm going to speak about Canadian data privacy. Now, let me tell you, data privacy in Canada is complex, a patchwork of data privacy laws. When we think about the sports world, which is private sector, Canadian sports organizations are required to abide by Canadian privacy law. But we have to think about something. Sports organizations that also operate outside of Canada but collect data about Canadian residents also need to take Canadian privacy into account. So for example, if an American sports club is collecting data about a Toronto resident who bought a ticket in Toronto but is traveling to the US to watch a game, they may have to think about Canadian privacy. In Canada, we have two federal privacy acts, and the one I'm going to focus on today is the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, also known as PIPEDA or PIPEDA, depending on who you speak to. But beyond PIPEDA that lays the groundwork for what private sector organizations need to do in privacy, we have so many other private sector privacy laws. There's Quebec Law 25, Alberta's private sector privacy law, British Columbia's private sector privacy law. And when we go beyond the private sector and we think about the other types of data or personal information that are collected in a sports organization or in the context of sports, then we now have to start thinking about health privacy laws. And we also have to think about the Canadian anti-spam legislation. Going back to PIPEDA, I want to tell you that PIPEDA is formed or made up of 10 fair information principles. Essentially, it's the bread and butter that makes PIPEDA what it is. There's 10, but unfortunately, because of the amount of time we have today, I'm going to focus on 3. Accountability is actually the first principle that's listed in PIPEDA. Accountability essentially requires organizations to have somebody within their organization be accountable for data privacy. A privacy officer, a privacy office, a privacy team, a privacy manager, for example. Somebody who is responsible for ensuring privacy is a consideration in the organization. Then we have identifying purposes. Identifying purposes essentially in simple terms means that we as organizations, we as privacy professionals need to identify the purpose for which we are collecting personal information from customers, consumers, employees, patients, healthcare providers, you name it. And the reason being is that privacy tells us that we are only supposed to collect information that we have identified a purpose for. And that leads us into the next fair information privacy principle that I wanted to highlight on this slide, limiting collection. PIPEDA requires organizations to limit the amount of personal information that is collected, meaning that if I am a sports fan, there is no reason why the NFL needs my health data in order for me to come and watch an NFL game in the US. When we talk about privacy user experience, where these two worlds collide, I immediately think of privacy by design. Privacy by design essentially tells us to think about privacy at the beginning of our system development, at the beginning of us building an application, at the beginning of our initiatives. One of the principles, there's 7, and one of them is about being proactive rather than reactive. So rather than waiting for something to go wrong, such as getting a complaint from a consumer, or a data breach happening in the organization, we should think about privacy proactively, so we ensure that privacy is built into everything that we do. As I was doing research for today's presentation, I actually stumbled upon guidance from the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. And the guidance essentially kind of put together 5 key best practices that organizations that are subject to PIPEDA, which I mentioned on the previous slide, what they should consider. The first one is privacy notices. I'm sure many of you have seen a privacy notice, but I'm sure many of you also haven't read a privacy notice. I'll be honest, before I got into privacy, I wasn't really reading privacy notices either, so I don't blame you. The OPC suggests to organizations to avoid long notices. Nobody wants to read a novel as a notice. Who has that time? Privacy notices should be easy to understand. Many people in the privacy world come from legal backgrounds. What that means sometimes, at least historically, is that oftentimes there's a lot of legal jargon or legalese in privacy notices. The challenge is many of us, myself included, are not lawyers. We don't think like lawyers. We don't know all this legal terminology. So that is not a clear privacy notice. Then the next thing is around intuitive design. This is more of a design principle. So the OPC suggests to organizations to design an application in a way that is intuitive. It's easy for people to navigate their way. I'll give you another example. My boomer parents who are looking to update their privacy settings on the Fubo TV app should be able to do so without calling me as tech support. The next one is privacy first, and I essentially described that already. It's about thinking about privacy at the onset or even before we think about what we're going to do to ensure that privacy is built into everything we do. Click fatigue is number 4. And for those of you who come from the user experience or the UX design space, you will appreciate this because click fatigue essentially means that we don't want people to have to click a million times. So going back to that privacy settings update, it should not take my mother 10 clicks in order to update her privacy settings. We should try to keep our clicks within 3 or less. That is what the industry best practice is from a UX perspective. Finally, we have personal information disclosure. So essentially what's being asked is that organizations, and we'll think back to the sports place, do not force fans to provide additional information. You do not need my social insurance number for me to go to BMO Field. It's absolutely not required. I should not have to disclose what is not necessary, as that was not a purpose that was identified in your privacy notice. But why is this even important? Well, when we think about it, I thought of 3 things. There are many other reasons, but for today, I'm going to focus on 3. Trust and credibility. User experience optimization of ticketing apps, streaming platforms gives us the opportunity to gain and maintain trust from fans. Here's another example. Imagine there's a data breach of fan data, which leads to many fans deciding to cancel their subscription to NBA League Pass or WNBA League Pass. Now we're dealing with a situation where there are less subscribers, less money coming in to a sports organization. And we also have to think, what is the risk to those individuals? There's a risk that they may be subject to theft or even identity fraud, depending on the type of data that has been breached. Beyond that, we think of regulatory compliance. Privacy UX enables sports organizations to comply with the law. This is law. Privacy is law. These are legal requirements. If organizations do not follow the law, they may be subject to regulatory fines, legal battles, and some serious reputational damage. And the challenge with reputational damage, I'll highlight that one today, is that you can't always quantify how bad or how significant reputational damage will be to an organization. This risk isn't really time-bound. If a data breach happens today, we may still be discussing it 10 years from now. So I wanted to highlight the third piece that often I feel isn't necessarily in the conversation. Greater trust from fans means a greater market share and increased revenue. It's a way to differentiate your sports club from the rest of the other sports clubs. When people recognize and trust that their data is being used in the way that you promised to them, they are more inclined to continue entrusting you with their data. People are becoming more conscious about privacy. Look at all the people who are here today. This consciousness is driving the decisions that these fans, consumers, patients are making about how organizations are going to be able to use their data. But there are many challenges, right? There are many challenges, particularly to the sports place. I'm going to do this a lot today. And I want, if you remember anything from today's presentation, please remember this. It's about balancing data security, data privacy, cybersecurity, and innovation. It's one of the biggest topics in the information security world. How is it that we stay innovative? We keep using technology to push the bounds, but respect privacy at the same time. And the challenge is, honestly, I don't have an answer for you. If I had the answer, I would be the queen of data privacy in Canada, I tell you. The next piece is around managing consent and transparency. Two of these happen to be fair information principles as well. How do we ensure that sports fans understand and freely participate to take part in the activities, especially the risky ones? The third piece is around complex regulatory landscape. Despite there being many laws, privacy laws in Canada, there's still some gaps. If we think about the prorogation of Parliament that occurred just this year, that action put a notable pause on the progress that we were supposed to see in the Canadian privacy space. And with critical updates on the horizon in Canadian privacy, are sports organizations going to be ready to respond to these likely new, stricter regulatory requirements? And the last piece, and this is quite specific to the sports industry, is that their existing privacy culture is, right? A lot of sports organizations don't see privacy as that important. Not that they don't see it as important, but not that important. They don't understand the importance of privacy. People are resistant to change. And that makes it now difficult. It's something else that privacy professionals in the sports space have to overcome. I was asked to share some best practices about how sports organizations can go about, being more privacy focused. So the first thing I thought back to is user consent experiences. Organizations in the sports place should look to collect, manage, and update user consent in a way that not only respects the fan preferences, but also fosters trust. Secondly is around transparency, or what we call openness in Canada. Privacy notices, we're bringing them up again, should be written in a clear, understandable way. Let's take another example. If organizations plan to use artificial intelligence, AI, to make automated decisions that leverage fan data, what will organizations tell their fans about how they're using artificial intelligence? Because there are laws in Canada where that transparency is required. Are organizations ready to respond to the fan inquiries about their AI use? Number 3, privacy should be seen as a non-negotiable. Privacy should be viewed as a business enabler. This is how you differentiate yourself from everybody else who is not taking privacy seriously. This is how you foster trust in your users and your patients. And lastly, and this is quite an interesting one, is there needs to be continuous monitoring of regulatory updates. And why I say this is because a lot of major sports leagues, I'll use Americans for example, are expanding outside of the US. They are traveling to Brazil. They're having games in Germany. They're having games in Ireland. And what that means is now they also have to think about privacy legislation around the world. What does Brazil's privacy law say? What does the GDPR say? And these are things that people need to keep up with. You need to stay up to date, and sometimes that's some of the biggest challenge that we face in data privacy, is staying up to date with what's happening. It's a reason I live on LinkedIn, because the LinkedIn people love to summarize what's happening in privacy, and I love to bookmark what they're sharing. And at times I read them, and at times I don't. In preparation for today's presentation, my mentor, a very dear and near friend and colleague to me, encouraged me to include some success stories, what I'm seeing in the sports space. So I'm going to bring up 2 things that I've noticed. Many of us, unfortunately, remember the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a tragic period, and we lost millions of lives, and it altered our relationship with so many different sectors. It altered our relationships, our social interactions with each other, our friends, and our family. As a sports fan, it was interesting because everyone was wondering, well, how on earth are we going to tune in or have a basketball game or a soccer tournament during the pandemic? So I want to highlight the National Basketball Association, the NBA. The NBA decided during COVID that they were going to leverage Microsoft, particularly Microsoft Teams. They were going to migrate their entire IT infrastructure to Microsoft Azure. And in this way, it enabled them to be able to have their friends tune into games, to still get that excitement during the playoffs and feel as though they were interacting with their favorite players. In my research, as I prepared for this presentation, I learned that cybersecurity and data privacy were top of mind in influencing the decision to partner with Microsoft. They wanted to not only ensure that fans were able to view the game, but they wanted to ensure that fans' data security was not compromised while they were viewing the game. I mentioned that the privacy culture in sports is a little interesting. It's different from healthcare, it's different from financial services, but there's a part I left out on purpose. What I'm seeing through my conversations and in my research with those who are in the sports place is that in the US, in Europe, many different sports organizations are starting to recognize the importance of sports privacy. Businesses are looking to change their business strategy to incorporate privacy by design into their business strategy. I have personally been in conversation with leaders in the sports place. So these discussions are happening, and it's an exciting time for not only a sports fan, but a privacy professional. And for those of you who may be looking to get into the intersection of sports and privacy, I just wanted you to know that a lot of roles are actually opening up in some of the largest sports organizations or sports clubs around the world. Now, I was asked to come up with at least a few key takeaways. And I was like, wow, I plan to cover so much information, I could talk about anything. But two things really stood out from the rest. First, it's again, that balance. Our use of innovative technology should not come at the expense of consumer or user privacy. What I mean by that is our decision to explore artificial intelligence should not compromise our privacy strategy. We should not be thinking, oh, we want to be efficient. We want to be revolutionary. We want to change the world with our technology if it means that privacy is going to be compromised. And whether we're talking about sports, or we're talking about financial services, or we're talking about healthcare, this is all relevant today. So if there's anything you can remember from today's presentation, just remember this. The second piece is around transparency and trust building. These two things need to, not should be, but need to be at the forefront of our business strategy. We need to think about how we are going to be open, but not too open, because that can also lead to some trouble. We need to think about how we plan to be transparent in our privacy notice so that our patients, our users, our fans understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, which vendors we plan to do to support these initiatives. It needs to be at the forefront, involved in all of our business strategies. And why, you ask, in case you missed it earlier, it's because it's about building trust. We want people to trust us with their data. We want people to know that when they sign up, when they subscribe, when they consent, their data is not going to be used in some weird way. Now, it's been an absolute pleasure, an honor, honestly, to be here speaking about the intersection of sports and privacy. I see many of you have already reached out to me on LinkedIn in preparation for today, but if you're looking to, continue this conversation further, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I've included a QR code here for the more tech-savvy people who want to scan the QR code and, follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn so we can continue this conversation, because I truly do believe that this space is going to be a space to watch. Merci tout le monde. It has been an honor and a pleasure again. Thank you.